Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 49 and it's a bit of a momentous week because we are going to be making up our quilt sandwich and getting ready to quilt. Now if you're new here, I will put a playlist at the top of the screen up here so that you can go and watch all of the other videos in this series. We've been making a quilt on a garden theme throughout 2023, and last week we put all our blocks together along with our borders to make our completed quilt top. And that's what this is over here. Now you are going to need some other materials as well for the process that we're going to do today. The first thing you're going to need is some cotton batting. I'm using heirloom cotton batting and I've got a full size piece here. I've used this before. It's a polyester cotton mix. I just picked this up off Amazon and I will link that in the description below. It's got a really good amount of shrinkage, so when we wash our quilt at the end of this process, it will create a lovely kind of antique puckered feel that I think works beautifully for quilt making. So the second thing I've got here is some spray-on temporary adhesive, and this is going to help us hold together the different layers of our sandwich while we're working with it until we've got it all pinned. And I've not used this before, but it comes highly recommended. I'm told it's a quilter's dream, so let's see how it goes and hope for the best with that. It's not cheap and you can skip this product if you want to, but I'm thought I'd give it a whirl. Now I've also got a piece of fabric for the back of my quilt. You can see here that I've patched together some of the offcuts of my quilt front. I haven't videoed that process, it's just something I wanted to do, but you can just use a solid piece of fabric. Now because our quilt is 1.5 meters wide, it is tricky to get a piece of cotton fabric that is that kind of width. So if you don't want to spend a fortune, what I suggest is that you can use either a double bed sheet or duvet cover. If you have one in your stash that you no longer use, that will give you the width and length that you need and will be a really good solid piece of fabric for the backing of your quilt. So another alternative would be to use a tablecloth, and you can pick up vintage bedding and vintage tablecloths easily on eBay, but you might just have one that you don't use anymore and that would work fine. I've also got a pair of dressmaking shears here. You could use a rotary cutter if you wanted to, but I don't have a cutting mat that's big enough to cover my entire table surface, so I'm just going to use shears for this part of the process this week. And then finally I've got some quilters safety pins, and if I bring them up close you can see that they've got a bend in them, and that helps you hook them through the layers of fabric so that you catch all of the layers in one go. So I've got a whole bunch of those. You can just use normal safety pins. I wouldn't recommend using straight pins because we're going to be working with this quilt quite a lot while it's pinned, and you don't want to create a situation where you're constantly stabbing yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do is unroll my batting, and you can see that it's much more crumpled towards where the centre of the roll was. So I'm going to start at the other end, which is a little bit less lumpy and creased. And I'm going to start by just laying out the batting on my dining room table. Now ideally we would spread this out on a hard floor and have everything flat, but most of us don't have a 3 metre square area of floor on a hard surface, certainly not in the UK, and so I wanted to show you how I'm going to do it in a normal domestic setting that most of us will have. So I've got my dining room table here and I've just laid out my batting so that it overhangs the edge. I'm going to give it a quick spray with some temporary adhesive, and then I'm going to lay my backing fabric on the surface of my batting. I want it fairly square and fairly central, and I'm just going to lay that out initially so that it's resting gently. I'm trying not to put too much pressure on it because I don't want it to stick yet. Now I've left about a 4-inch border all the way around, maybe 10 centimetres. And what I'm doing now is just smoothing out that backing fabric from the centre to the outside edge. So I'm lifting and readjusting my quilt and working my way around the table so that my backing fabric is laying as flat as it can possibly be. So the idea of this process is to get out any lumps and bumps and keep everything flat and smooth so that you get a nice, smooth, even quilt. And you can see that I'm readjusting the quilt all the time and sliding it backwards and forwards on the table so that I can get to the edges. Every now and again I'm going to give a bit of a respray, and this smoothing not only evens out the lumps in the quilt but it also creates that adhesion. So once you've pressed the quilt backing on, you can see if I shake it, it's nicely adhered. It's not going to go anywhere while we're working with it. I can peel it off if I want to, but it's going to hold in place for the time being. So now I'm going to just flip the whole thing over, lay it flat out. So now my quilt back is on my table, and now I can put my topper on. I want to see where the centre is. I can just about see it through the batting, and I'm just going to put a little bit of spray at the centre. So now I need to find the centre of my quilt top, and if you followed the patterns in my design, it should be a ribbon stripes block right at the centre. You basically need to count 4 blocks in from one side and 4 blocks down from the top, and that is your central panel. And so what I'm going to do is fold up my quilt so that that central panel is the only thing that is facing the batting. So I'm just going to concertina up, trying to keep it fairly flat so that I can fold it nice and small and keep it under control. I'm going to fold in the sides first, and then once I've done that I'll fold up the top and bottom edges, and that will give me a piece that is roughly the size of that central panel. This is just going to help me centre everything and locate it so that it's squared off with the backing fabric. So there's my central panel. I want to relocate my centre, and I want to position that so that it's evenly spaced. Now the centre panel on the back of my quilt is significantly bigger than on the front, so I just want to make sure that I've got an even margin all the way around so that my quilt isn't just really askew. Once I'm happy with the positioning of that central block, I can then unfold my quilt topper. I'm going to spray the side, and then I'm going to repeat that smoothing process that I did with the backing fabric, this time working on the quilt topper. So I'm just spraying there on the right hand side of my quilt, unfolding, and there you can see me smoothing from the centre out. So we always need to go from the centre out, never from the outside in, otherwise you're going to end up with a big bundle at the centre of your quilt that you don't want. Working my way round, working towards me first of all, sliding the quilt on my table so that I can get to all the different parts of it. Then I'm round the other side, and I'm going to repeat the process on the left hand side of the quilt. And I suppose the only thing to be careful of in this process is we've got a definite right way up on the front of our quilt. So if your fabric for the backing has got a right way up, you want to make sure that everything is going in the same direction. When you're working on the corners and the edges, you have to try really hard not to distort them, obviously, because it's patchwork, there's quite a lot of play in it. So you just want to make sure that you don't distort it, you want it as squared off as possible. When you're happy that your quilt topper is positioned and nice and flat, I'm just going to trim off the excess batting. You can see I've got a good 4 inches of batting there all the way around, and I'm just going along with my shears, trimming down those sides just so that we don't have tons of excess fabric to handle. It's really important that you do this with the quilt as flat as possible. Don't be tempted to lift it up and guess, because you are likely to cut a corner off, and you should feel free to ask yourself how she knows this. The last quilt I made, I ended up cutting my backing fabric far too short because I couldn't see it, and I just went a bit scissor happy, and I had to do some fairly significant jiggery pokery to make the quilt work. Now you are going to be left with a fair amount of quilt batting. Do not throw it away if you want to join in with our project for 2024, because we are going to be using that. Now I've got my pins, and I'm going to start right at the centre of the quilt, and I'm going to take a pin right through all 3 layers and pin those together at the centre. And it's worth just checking the first couple to make sure that you are going all the way through, and you should be able to see some of the pin coming through on the back of your quilt. If you have done that, then your technique is right. So sometimes it takes a little while to get your eye in to work out what angle to take the pin back up at so that you're catching all 3 layers, but the adhesive does really help with that. Once you've got your pin at the centre, I'm going to put some pins at the 4 corners of that central panel. So I'm just pinning, working towards the outside, so I'm pushing the fabric out rather than pinning towards the centre. So I'll start in the block and push out to the edge, and I'm just putting them diagonally across those 4 corners. And this is basically the process that we're going to do across the whole of the surface of the quilt. So once you've got your central panel pinned, we're going to work on the ring of blocks that surround it. So again, I'm going to put a pin at the centre of each block to hold the central point in place, and then I'm going to put a pin at the corner of each block. Now, it's important that you try and avoid pinning through embroidery. You don't want to spoil your embroidery, and some of our blocks have something quite significant at the centre, so like the butterfly, you can see the ribbon roses are going to be problematic there. So where you've got something at the centre that makes it hard to pin, just find a place as close to the centre or as close to the corner as you can. That is going to allow you to put a pin through. So you can see on the bottom edge of that ring there, I've got buttons and Suffolk puffs. I just pinned slightly to the side there just so that I've got a fairly even spread of pins. And I'm going to keep working my way out towards the edge, working around each ring of blocks until I'm at my border, which is where I am now. So I don't have enough pins left to pin every single panel. Ideally, that is what you would do. You'd pin every single patch on your border, but I haven't got enough, so I'm going to put a pin every 2 or 3 patches. And I've deliberately made my backing of my quilt slightly smaller than my front because I'm going to offset that with some binding in a few weeks' time. So you just need to make sure that you are not pinning so close to the edge that you miss your backing fabric. And when you get to your corner panels, you just want to put a pin in the centre of that corner block. And that is the quilt sandwich process done. So we've got our 3 layers, our backing, our batting and our quilt topper. They are all attached together now, and we are ready to start the actual quilting process. So I hope you have picked up some useful tips in this video. It's been quite a quick one this week. Although the video was short, it did take me a good hour and a half, 2 hours to get this process complete. And so put an audiobook on, watch a box set while you're doing it, and just take your time so that your quilt has the best finish possible. So I'll link some videos over here if you want to find out more about the Garden Quilt Project, and if you like our content, do click on our logo. It makes it really easy for you to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week putting together your quilt sandwich, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!